My 7th grade English teacher hated me, but I made her think she was crazy for 2 weeks. So, in 7th grade, I missed a lot of school due to medical and mental issues. That being said, all of my teachers were understanding. Except one. I'm not going to lie, I don't actually remember her real name, so, we'll call her Ms. Bitter, MB, my 7th grade English teacher. I'm sure most of you remember or are still having to do accelerated reading or are. If not, basically, the school gave all students a test to see what reading level they are on, what book ranges they can read and how many points one would need to get to pass English. They would tell you to check out books and each book had a point system on it. This was the amount of points you receive after finishing the book and then taking a 10-question quiz to make sure you read it. I always scored 12 plus so I could read anything I wanted. Not the point, but moving on. Well, every English class was required to allow students 30 minutes to read their art books. They had to be art books specifically. If it had no points, you couldn't read it during that time block. They were also required to take the class to the library once a week to check out new books or take quizzes. Being sick and absent so much, I didn't get to go to the library often. So, I was always having to go to the library before or after school to do my shit. I didn't have the best home life, so it was hard for me to go early or stay later. Well, many times I went to class, I either didn't have a book or I had a book, but it wasn't an art book. MB would go around and check every damn book every day to make sure we were doing what we were supposed to. If you didn't have it, she'd give you a warning. 3 warnings and you get detention. Needless to say, this happened to me. I was furious because MB literally had a bookshelf full of our books in her class that no one was allowed to read if we forgot our book or didn't have it because reasons, like me. MB chastised me in front of the class and even scolded me for being absent too much. She made me cry more than once. After months of this, I decided to be petty because I was sick of her picking on me. At this point, she basically just expected me to not have my approved book. So, I went into her room one morning while she wasn't there. She had bus duty, and wrote down about 5 to 10 art books on her personal bookshelf that she wouldn't let us use, again, still not sure why. Then I hid them behind all the other books. After that, I went to the library during that precious hour lunch period to start my revenge. I checked out about 4 or 5 copies of the books on that shelf. I couldn't check out any more than that. Next day, I come in and we get to the point of silent reading. Here we go. I pull out one of the books I had duplicated and began to read. MB starts making her rounds to check the books. I was sitting there hoping so bad that she would do what I thought she'd do. She gets to me, I don't look at her and I can see in my peripheral vision she is looking very hard at my book. Silently, I observed her walk directly over to her bookshelf and begin to look for what I assume was the book she thought I took so I wouldn't get in trouble again. I could see the anger in her face when she couldn't find it. MB fast walks over to me and with her everlasting need to torture and embarrass me, she grabs my book, pretty forcibly and starts accusing me of taking a book without permission, and that I would be getting another warning and detention for stealing from her. I just sat there calmly letting her finish. Then I said, MB, that book is from the library. Not your bookshelf. You are mistaken. She disagrees again and starts to head to her desk for the write-up. I turn and I say, would you please look on the inside? It clearly shows where it belongs to the library with a checkout list and everything. Has my name right on it. She did, thinking she would get me for lying too. Well, I saw her face get bright red and slowly comes over to give it back. She didn't apologize or anything. In fact, I think it made her hate me more. I was vindicated, but this wasn't enough for me. Day after day, I'd bring another duplicate book and each time she would stomp over to her shelf, not finding her copy, looking at me with 7 hell's fury. Each time, I'd show her the library stamp when she'd approach to accuse again. This went on for about 2 weeks. I honestly think I made her feel crazy and so irritated that she couldn't pin anything on me. I also came in again one day, in the morning, and put all her books back in place as if they were there all along. I got my art points by just reading the duplicate books and passed with an A. I still don't know why she hated me so much, but for about 2 weeks, I enjoyed watching her crumble every day and not being able to punish me for shit. Not the most elaborate of petty revenges, but I loved it.
How my uncle cost a car dealership $300,000. How my uncle cost a car dealership $300,000. This happened almost 30 years ago, and my uncle has passed since, but it's one of my favorite stories. My aunt and uncle never had kids, and were pretty well off financially. They had two vehicles, an old 60s Chevy pickup, and a mid-80s Cadillac, only a few years old at the time. The Cadillac was their town car, and they drove the old truck to and from their cabin or if they needed to haul something. My uncle, on his way back home from the cabin, decided he was going to go buy a new Cadillac, because he bought a new one every 5 years or so. It's important to note, my uncle wore overalls and a plain t-shirt every day. So he pulls into the Cadillac dealership with his old beater truck, dressed like a farmer. He walks around for 45 minutes looking at the cars, and not one employee comes to offer any assistance. He gets angry and leaves without saying a word to any of the employees. He went home, showered, threw on a suit, hopped into his Cadillac, and drove straight back to the dealership. As soon as he pulled in and got out, every single salesman walked up to him immediately. He then said, "Fuck all of you, I was here for 45 minutes in my old truck and wearing overalls. Not one of you even spoke to me. I'm going to next closest Cadillac dealership almost 100 miles away." Over the course of the rest of his life, he bought 6 brand new Cadillacs from that other dealership, for roughly $300,000 altogether. That dealership lost $300,000 in sales because they thought he looked too poor. I bet they never made that mistake again. If it's not here by 5, I'm not paying for it. Years ago I drove a tow truck and we delivered a lot of cars to dealers. One little dealership was notorious for having jerks working there. It was like all the high school bullies got back together and opened a car lot. Got a call on a Friday after lunch, from a client asking me to deliver a car to the dealership, and they had to have it before 5 p.m., or they didn't have to pay for it, and by pay for it, I mean the car and the tow bill. This would be no problem, the car was a couple blocks from me and the dealer was about a mile away. I went and hooked the car and headed to the dealer. It was 3:30 p.m. when I left my office. I get to the dealership and go in to find someone to sign for it. No one would sign, they told me to just park it around back. Knowing what jerks these guys were, no way was I going to leave it there without being able to prove they got it before 5. I talked to the new car manager, used car manager, service manager and finance manager. No one would sign for it, and they were taunting me almost looking for a fight. Okay. I dropped the car and drove it up to their front doors, got out and locked it, backed up and looked at the crew inside laughing. I backed up another couple steps and threw the keys onto their roof. They lost their shit. I waved and left. I was back in my office in less than 5 minutes. By this time, it's about 4:45 p.m. I walk in and my boss was on the phone and laughing. He called me right into his office and put the call on speaker. Our client was on the phone, as was the GM from the dealer. The GM was a lunatic about his showroom being blocked by the car and me tossing the keys on the roof. My client and boss knew these guys were jerks and wanted to know what happened. I told them no one would sign for the car and it had to be there before 5 o'clock. GM said, "Right." I said, "So it's before 5 and you're calling to complain the car is blocking your showroom?" GM said, "Yes." At this point my boss, the client, Mike, and I were all laughing hysterically. The GM got madder until I could catch my breath and call his crew out for not signing for it. They were going to say the car got there after 5 so they didn't have to pay if I didn't have proof of delivery. That's kind of hard to do now because the GM was on the phone at 4:45 complaining about the car on his lot. That dealer treated their customers the same way they tried to treat me. Less than 2 years later, the building was a mattress store.